A Plaguelands Media production.
Hey everyone, this is Hugh from Plaguelands Media bringing you another graphic novel review today. So, cheers. Now, today is kind of exciting for me because I honestly didn't think that I would be rereading and reviewing this comic book series, but I finally kind of got off my ass. Yes, I'm talking about Preacher. Today I'll be looking at Volume 1 of the graphic novel series Gone to Texas. You can see on the cover we have Jesse Custer, Tulip, and Cassidy the Vampire. Now, Preacher is a comic book series that is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, I would put it in my top 3 comic book series of all time. I absolutely love it. I fell in love with it through the pages of Wizard magazine. Those comic book nerds out there from back in the day will know what Wizard was. Written by Garth Ennis, who is still one of my favorite comic book writers. Art by Steve Dillon, which I've heard some people say they don't like the art in Preacher, which is perfectly fine, but I think it's absolutely fantastic. They did make a television show. I think it ran for 4 seasons. I've only seen season 1. I watched it with my wife. She wasn't really a huge fan, which is perfectly fine. Now, I have all of the Preacher comics in graphic novel form. As you can see right here, this is the complete collection, including the kind of Preacher special Tall in the Saddle. When I came to South Korea, of course, I couldn't bring everything I wanted with me. I couldn't bring my role-playing games. I couldn't bring my comic books. I couldn't bring my DVDs and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of that I gave to my good Plaguelands Media buddy, Mr. Ian Van Gammon. And he held on to some stuff. He sold some stuff. It was his to... I literally gave it to him, so it was his to do with what he pleased. But with Preacher, that magnificent bastard held on to them for me. He knew how much I love Preacher. He knew how much I adored this series. And he held on to them, and then a few years back, my wife and I were back in Australia, and he was like, here's all your Preacher graphic novels. And I pretty much took them back to South Korea with me, which weighed my bag down unbelievably, but he kept them in pristine fucking condition. Like, these things are the same as the day I first fucking read them. So, big shout out, big props to Ian for doing that. Now, a lot of people are going to find Preacher a very divisive story. Garth Ennis has a way of kind of fucking with people. There is a lot of religious tropes in here, of course, but he subverts them. There is a lot of absolutely sick shit, like unbelievably sick shit, which is one of the reasons why I love Garth Ennis, because it reminds me a lot of some of my favorite authors, like Joe R. Lansdale, who actually writes the introduction for this particular graphic novel. So, if you're easily offended, please don't watch the rest of this video, because I'm going to go through a deep dive spoiler-filled review of Preacher. But if you want to have some fun, if you want to see what all the hype was about, if you've never even read Preacher, never even heard of Preacher, then by all means, kick back, put your feet up, have a fucking drink, and let's get right into the next episode of...
Read a fucking book. Read a fucking book. Read a fucking book. People.
Okay, so this is Preacher Gone to Texas. This book covers issues 1 to 7 of the series. Now, Preacher actually ran from 1995 to 2000. There were 66 issues of the original story. I believe 5 one-shot specials and a 4-issue Saint of Killers miniseries. But if you have the collection like I do, which I showed you in the intro, all of those are included in there. So you get kind of everything. This fantastic cover where we see Jesse Custer, the preacher, Cassidy, who is an Irish vampire, and Tulip, who was Jesse Custer's kind of former love. So we have the writer and artist, Steve Dillon, artist, Garth Ennis, writer, gone to Texas. There is the Saint of Killers. We have this introduction by Joe R. Lansdale, which is really cool. And then we start with issue 1. Issue 1 starts with Jesse, Cassidy, and Tulip in a diner. And they're kind of talking about how they all came together and how they all met back up. And Jesse decides to start with his side of the story. So he's basically a preacher in a small town, and you can see that he's maggoted off his tree, and he goes into a bar, and then he starts sharing the secrets of all the people in the bar. This is a very small town, and some of these secrets are pretty fucked up, like a guy's filming bestiality porn in his barn, and some guys kind of raped and murdered a hitchhiker and all this kind of shit, and he's just going on, and they're telling him to shut the fuck up, and he won't. So they just beat the shit out of him and leave him kind of out on the street. And then we cut to heaven, and we can see the Adelphi here. There are 2 types of angels in this. The Adelphi, who are like the scholars, and then the Seraphim, who are the warriors. And something has broken out of this prison, and the Seraphim come because it's killed one of their own. And it is referred to as Genesis. So this being Genesis has escaped, and the Seraphim, who are in charge of heaven because God is not there, basically told the Adelphi, fucking clean up your mess. And they kind of freak out a little bit, and then they agree that they need a person to help them. Then we get to Tulip's story. Tulip tries to kill this guy in a limo, misses him, and shoots the jaw off another guy. And as she's fleeing, Cassidy is in a truck, and she tries to kind of steal the truck. And Cassidy gets shot in the process, right in the head, but as you can see, he doesn't die. Tulip didn't even know that Cassidy had been shot. Then we move to one of the Adelphi going to the tomb of the Saint of Killers, who basically blows his brains out. And the Saint of Killers has been tasked with finding Genesis. We jump back to Jesse's story. Jesse says that the turnout at church was huge that day because everyone thought that he was going to have another fucking meltdown. But then something bursts through the door of the church and straight into Reverend Custer. And everyone in the church is disintegrated. And Reverend Custer, you can see, has this strange being behind him. Is this Genesis? Possibly. Tulip and Cassidy have parked. Cassidy's in the back of the truck with a blanket over him, obviously. Although it's a little bit weird, but I mean, he's a fucking vampire. We'll find out later. Tulip sees the explosion, drives towards the church. Cassidy's freaking the fuck out. And as she's going through the rubble, she finds Jesse Custer. At this time, they kind of decide to take a little bit of a break, and we see Jesse walking away with John Wayne, who is a figure that will appear quite frequently in this series. Now we come to Sheriff Root, who is a rednecked, racist piece of shit, but there is a reason for his attitude. And he's blaming everything on Martians. We'll just leave it there. He says kind of other stuff, but that's neither here nor there. So Jesse finally wakes up. So you can see there's a lot of kind of time jumping, but it's never confusing. Jesse wakes up and realizes that whatever came into him, he now knows its origin. An angel and a demon fell in love, and they had a child, and that child was Genesis, a being of free thought. Cassidy's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then a helicopter overhead finds them, and the sheriff is telling them all to stand down. And this is when Jesse realizes he has this power. He can tell people what to do when his eyes turn red and the text turns red. In this case, he says, drop all the guns and let us go. And they all have to kind of, they're all compelled to do so. In this kind of narrative, he refers to this as the word of God. So they get away while the sheriff is pissed off that everyone kind of dropped their guns. And as they are kind of standing around after they've escaped, the Saint of Killers comes up to them. And then we move into issue 2. Now, this is where the feds are involved. They question Sheriff Root as to what happened, and naturally he's being a fucking redneck asshole. And he tells them that the Saint of Killers just unloaded on his men and basically wiped them out. He said that his draw was so quick he couldn't even see it. And when they try to, those in the helicopter try to take him down, he takes out the helicopter. And Jesse sees this and is like, we've got to get the fuck out of here. And so the FBI questioning the sheriff, and the sheriff shows him the blood and brain matter that is still on him. The FBI agent kind of doesn't believe him, but that's neither here nor there. And then when Sheriff Root leaves, the other cop goes, listen, don't be too hard on him. There's a reason he is the way he is. And shows him a picture of Sheriff Root's son. Now, his son was a huge fan of the band Nirvana. And when Kurt Cobain killed himself, Sheriff Root's son and his son's best friend decide to do the same thing. His son's best friend dies. Sheriff Root's son, however, doesn't. And he becomes Arseface. And you can see the dialogue is all in like, woo, 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 and then you've got the translations here, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. His son is trying his best to kind of make it up to his father. Sheriff Root's wife has left him, and he is just disgusted by his son and his son's actions. But his son is still kind of optimistic that they can get this relationship back. Tulip questions Jesse over why he left a year ago. And Cassidy interrupts them. But Custer basically uses the word of God on Cassidy, and Cassidy is standing on his head, and he's like, don't ever fucking do this to me again. John Wayne appears before Jesse to give him some advice, while Cassidy and Tulip go to buy clothes for Jesse Custer. And they have their kind of back and forth. Cassidy's being a bit flirty Tulip is really disgusted by him, doesn't really like him at all, just because of his attitude. The Adelphi are lamenting that not only one of them has been killed by the Saint of Killers, but they're in a lot of freaking trouble, like a ton of trouble. So they've got Jesse his new clothes. Jesse's kind of flirting with the waitress here. And as they leave, some of the locals don't quite like Jesse's attitude. And he was like, hey, it's all good. We're just having a bit of fun. And the locals aren't having any of it. And so they get into a brawl, a fight. And Cassidy, in the ensuing melee, gets stabbed in the eye with a knife. And as retribution, he starts ripping the guy's throat out. Okay. This is where we finally get Cassidy is an actual vampire. Okay, let's move on to issue 3. We have the Adelphi are just getting drunk because Genesis is still out there. The Saint of Killers has been loosed. The Seraphim are pissed off, and God is not there to sort it out. Custer uses the word of God on Cassidy again, even though Cassidy in the last issue told him not to, and tells him to stop drinking this guy's blood. And he calls Cassidy an abomination, and then Cassidy fucks off. We get the Saint of Killers kind of coming back and looking for Custer. He basically takes out the cops. The FBI agent is trying to kind of make heads or tails of all of this. And they decide we need Sheriff Root because he was there at the very beginning. So Sheriff Root and Arseface are watching TV. Sheriff Root gets the call, and Arseface is like, wow, he's going out, and he's got an investigation, and so he decides to sneak along in the back of Sheriff Root's patrol car. Jesse and Tulip are having their kind of one-on-one. He wants to know why she has a gun, but at this point he's not willing to tell her. And Cassidy drives back to the diner where they had the fight, and he finds all of the dead bodies, and the Saint of Killers is there. And the Saint of Killers kind of gets into a fight with Cassidy. Cassidy punches him, breaks his hand, and the Saint of Killers just blows the shit out of him. In the bathroom, Jesse is kind of washing up, and in the mirror, he just sees nothing but fire. He tries to explain it to Tulip about the origin of Genesis, that the angel and the demon fell in love and they had a child, and then it was a child of free thought, which scared God, so God had it imprisoned. And there's a knocking at the door, and as Jesse answers it, it's Sheriff Root. And Sheriff Root has basically got a gun to his head. The Adelphi suddenly realize that not only does Custer know about Genesis, he also knows about the Saint of Killers as well. Okay, then we move into issue 4. We get a little bit of a backstory. A young Jesse Custer is watching a Western on TV when John Wayne reaches out of the television and says, we are going to be partners. That would explain why he keeps seeing him. Sheriff Root takes the two of them outside. Tulip pulls her gun on him. and there's this kind of a Mexican standoff thing, while Cassidy, even though Jesse called him an abomination, he's like, fuck it, this guy's dangerous, he needs help. And then the Saint of Killers comes and sees Sheriff Root with Jesse and Tulip. He knows that Jesse has Genesis in him, and then they have a bit of a showdown, and Cassidy comes along at the right time and slams his truck right into the Saint of Killers. As you can see, it doesn't do anything, and Cassidy goes flying through the windscreen. Jesse and him, in this little moment, kind of reconcile. The Saint of Killers goes to kill Sheriff Root, and then Arseface comes out of the car and he's like, don't kill my dad. And all of them kind of look at him like, what the fuck? And then, word of God again, Jesse says, enough. And then he uses the word of God on the Saint of Killers, so the Saint of Killers can't draw or shoot his guns. And he uses the Saint of Killers with his word of God to get the Adelphi down so that they can answer his questions. And they come in the form of this giant angel. And Custer's like, cut the shit. And then we get one of the Adelphi who explains that after Genesis was born, because there's this being of free thought, because it's the host or the spawn of a demon and an angel, that God had it imprisoned, put the seraphim in charge of heaven, and left. He's out. And no one knows where he is. And Jesse's like, how can he just fucking do that? And they're like, we don't know, but he did. And so he basically, at that point, he's like, you know what? We're done with this. Fuck off. And the Saint of Killers, he tells the Saint of Killers to leave. And then Sheriff Root was like, I'll be leaving myself. And Jesse says, in the word of God, you're going to go fuck yourself. And by that, we find out that Sheriff Root has actually cut off his own penis and shoved it up his ass. And it's too late for the doctors to retrieve it and reattach it. Sheriff Root calls his son to him, and his son is like, you're talking to me, Dad, this is amazing. And asks him, can you give me my gun? And then Sheriff Root shoots himself in the head in the back of the ambulance. And Arseface kind of sees his dad kill himself right in front of him, and he runs off into the night. Back in heaven, the Seraphim have the Adelphi that let the being Genesis escape, and they're going, fuck you, we did everything we could, this is all fucked, but they're like, we don't care, and they send them into this spiraling pit. Arseface seeks vengeance on Reverend Custer, and he will forevermore be known as Arseface. He declares that is his name. And the three of them, Tulip, Jesse, and Cassidy, kind of walk off into the sunset, but Jesse looks back and smiles at John Wayne. So that is the first 4 issues of Preacher, setting up the story arc where he is going to go and find God and hold him accountable for leaving. That is the big kind of plot device that follows Jesse Custer through all 66 main issues of the story. Okay, we then jump to New York City. We have this cop who is a bit of a loser. He's never really done anything worthwhile. He's accident prone. But his partner is this kind of badass cop, this guy who is really quite homophobic and tough, and always kind of gets his man. And they kind of paired up together. So all of this guy's fuck-ups, he kind of fixes, and he's a real badass. At the same time, we get the story of this serial killer who is cutting off people's faces, as you can see, and he tortures them, and then he's like, well, we better put your face back on, and he goes and grabs some nails. Now, at this point, Cassidy has this friend. He's a reporter into like the supernatural weird shit, who he's going to ask to help Jesse find, or on the quest to find God. He's going to ask this guy to look into religious phenomena. Maybe one of those will lead him in the right direction. So this guy called Cy comes along. He's a longtime friend of Cassidy's, and he kind of agrees to help out with this kind of mission. They don't really tell him exactly what's going on. They kind of keep him in the dark a bit, but he has some contacts, and he'll kind of let them know. So Jesse and Tulip walking through New York, trying to get a grasp of this new dynamic, this new relationship they have. She ends up going back to the hotel. Cy goes off, and Jesse and Cassidy decide to do the touristy thing. We are at the cop station, where the super cop is basically trying to get information, interrogating people, and kind of doing his thing, while people joke about his partner always being a bit of a fucker. Jesse, never having been to New York before, wants to go to the top of the Empire State Building because he is, as the other characters say, such a fucking tourist. And Cassidy basically tells him, I was here when this place opened, and I was one of the first up on the top. So they're just talking about this and that, and then Cassidy decides to jump off the edge, but of course, being a vampire, nothing happens. We see this officer, I believe his name is Paulie, the super cop. He's getting these phone calls from people. Hello, Detective Bridges. Do you want to do it again? And then they hang up, and you can see the look on his face. We don't know what exactly is going on here. Okay, in the next issue, they are in a bar. Cassidy and Jesse are in a bar, and they're playing pool, but they've kind of beaten up the bartender. Tulip is back in her hotel room. Jesse is listening to her having this really weird conversation about the incident where she shot the guy in the jaw, and she's like, I'll make it right, I'll fix it. She realizes that Jesse is eavesdropping on her, and she kind of berates him and basically tells him to get out. And John Wayne is basically nearly there, partner. The two cops are kind of on a stakeout. We see Cy watching them, and the two cops are called to this building where they go in, and they are talking to the dead man's wife, and she's like, I know he's been murdered, and she freaks out. The super cop Paulie Bridges basically says, you've got to look in this bag. Can you tell me, is this your husband's scrotum? Jesse and Tulip are walking and talking again. Nothing important there. The two cops are, the bad cop he gets a phone call from the killer. He asks this guy, can you put a trace on it? And the guy's like, no, what the fuck? Fuck off, you idiot. And then the killer hangs up. They arrive at Sai's apartment. Sai comes back and talks about some religious kind of stuff. There's this blind guy who apparently can see, and I can take you to him. But it's going to have to be like tomorrow night, which is fine. And they kind of go over it. Sai, Jesse, and Tulip. Tulip is kind of hungover because they got fucking plastered the night before. And they're in the car. And Sai leaves Cassidy at his place and says, just, you know, crash here. I'm going to take Jesse and Tulip. And at this point, the loser detective kind of gets a tip-off. And his partner hasn't been into work. His partner called in sick. So he has to go and take this one on his own. He's given a lot of shit by his chief. He gets another call. Makes sure the guy actually taps it this time. And Sai shows Jesse to where the place is. He'll stay in the car with Tulip because the blind guy is a bit anti about reporters. Cassidy is staying in the house. He's looking at some porn stuff. And he opens the refrigerator and says, oh, fuck. At this point, Sai and Jesse are kind of talking. Sai and Tulip are kind of talking. Tulip is feeling sick. And then Sai basically stabs a knife through her hand. This cover is fucking amazing, by the way. In Sai's refrigerator are the faces and the heads and the hands. And the cops have actually been called there. So Sai has kind of tipped them off that the killer is there. Cassidy opens the curtains only to be burnt by the sun. And they're about to kick the fucking door down. Custer goes to the apartment of the apparently blind prophet. And he is shocked when he enters. Sai explains the plan to Tulip that he is the killer who has been killing these people because he can get the inside scoop. And now that Jesse Custer is there and Cassidy, he is able to kind of frame them for the murders and get away scot-free. And he has Tulip with him that he can kind of do his thing with. He leaves her in the car so that he can kind of go off and do his other stuff. And when Jesse opens the door, Paulie the cop is there in kind of bondage gear, getting, well, doing what he does. So he's this massive homophobe, but he's actually gay himself. The cops come in. Cassidy doesn't know what to do, so he kind of grabs a knife and stabs himself through the neck, so it looks like he's one of the victims. The loser cop is on his way to Paulie's place and he gets taken out by a truck. Tulip manages to pull the knife out of her hand while Paulie is fighting with the Reverend. The reporter comes in with a shotgun and basically is about to kill Jesse and let Paulie take all the credit. When the loser cop comes, Johnny, I think his name is, it says Johnny, yeah. So the loser cop comes and everything kind of goes to shit. The loser cop falls over. Tulip comes up. Tulip starts kind of firing randomly. And Custer uses the word of God on Cy. He says, fucking die, after punching him once. And so Cy is dead. And Custer is like, don't point that fucking thing at me. So the cops put their guns down. And Custer uses the gun to shoot Cy in the head. Uses Johnny's gun to shoot Cy in the head. So now Johnny is kind of the hero. And he walks out with Tulip. So now it looks like Johnny took down this serial killer. The people that were in Paulie's house leave. Paulie kind of breaks down and confesses everything to Johnny, the loser cop. And then we get the end of the this was like a 3-issue story arc where Cassidy decides to go his own way for a while, maybe down to New Orleans. The loser cop is now the hero cop. Paul left the force, but he still calls his kind of friend every once in a while. Cassidy does his Cassidy stuff, and Tulip and Jesse ride off into the sunset. So, this graphic novel really set up 2 kind of story arcs. We got the first 4 issues with the origin of Genesis, the Saint of Killers, and the birth of Arseface, as well as introducing Cassidy, Jesse, and Tulip. The second one was more of a serial killer New York story with this kind of good cop, bad cop, or hero cop, loser cop kind of dichotomy happening. And then getting caught up in the middle of it, and then going their kind of separate ways, which happens for like a few issues in the rest of the story. So, Preacher gone to Texas. Now, it has been a long, long, long time since I reread this. I'm talking about 18 or 19 years was the last time I read this. And I reread it again just so I could review it for this channel, and fuck me, did this not disappoint. It's still as great as it was back in the day. Now, there are some things in this comic that are problematic. The use of racial slurs, for example, stereotyping, homophobia, all that kind of thing, that you couldn't print this today. It just wouldn't happen. You've got to look at this from a 90s point of view. This is mid-90s. This is 1995, remember. With that said, I can tell you now, the story only gets better, and by better, I mean more fucked up from here. Now, I am definitely going to read and review the rest of the series. I've got to be very careful. There are some things in there that I'm going to have to cover up with post-it notes and whatnot. But I want your thoughts. Like, do you really want to know what happens? Or are you quite happy to go, this was a 90s comic, let's leave it at that. Let's move on to more contemporary stuff. Your thoughts and opinions. Leave a comment in the comment section down below and tell me what you think. Because, quite frankly, I'm having a fucking blast with Preacher. Absolutely love it. But I do have a ton of other graphic novels that I can read and I can review for you guys. So, you know what? I'll leave it up to you. Although I am definitely going to be continuing the Preacher series, but I just want to know what you think. That's all. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, leave a comment, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any other Plaguelands Media videos. We have some amazing projects coming up in the future. I'm not going to spoil them, but let's just say one of them that Mr. Ian Van Gammett is working on gave me literal chills. So I'll just leave it at that. But everybody, please stay safe. Have a fantastic rest of your day. But most importantly, and I cannot stress this enough, could you all please go and read a fucking book, people?